You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Greger on dailyfaceoff.com.
Welcome to the Daily Face-Off Rundown, episode 39. I'm Jason Greger, alongside Frank Saravalli, coming to you once again from the woodjerseys.com studio. You can see my lovely Boston Bruins. Frank's a little closer, and you can really see the intricate work on that Toronto Maple Leafs one. You can get all of them at woodjerseys.com. Of course, they're licensed NHL apparel, and they're getting more teams all the time. It's fascinating, and they look really cool. And I like, Frank, that you put it up close because I think people get a better sense of just how cool it looks. How you doing?
I'm good. How you doing?
Oh, I was kind of laughing. I try to stay off social media on Father's Day and stuff like that. And I saw,
you just do belly flops. I saw you.
Yeah, that's no belly, but I should have showed you the end product, buddy. That was just like, my father was a professional diver.
Was he really?
And, well, I shouldn't say professional, but he was like, my dad had leg perthes when he was young. So he was on crutches from the ages of 12 to 15. So couldn't play any other sports, but he could swim. And like, he was a really good swimmer and diver. So when I was a kid, we used to go to the swimming pool, and my dad would be doing all these different dives off the diving board. I'm like, are you kidding? So I can do a very simple, but my entry is quite good. I should have probably put the entry.
You're a no splash entry guy. Is that what you're telling
well,
me?
no, I'm not that good, but plus I don't like to dive from high, right? Like I like the 5 meter one. That's max. I can't go 10 meters.
I know this is going to shock you. I am definitely not a no splash entry guy. There is nothing graceful about me doing anything, let alone getting in a pool.
Oh yeah, man. I love it. It was outdoor. We got the outdoor pool at the Glendale golf course. So it's like the greatest thing we've ever done. My son loves to swim, so he spent hours out there just relaxing. And but I saw like the people were freaking out, and I'm kind of like, I didn't understand it. Why, like Robin Lehner and Marc-Andre Fleury, we're going to have Kevin Woodley come in. So he's going to go really in depth. He's like our goalie guru. He's going to join us today to talk about it. But I was kind of surprised because Vegas got to the where they were all regular season. And I don't know the exact number, but like, I want to say it was 20 straight games where they just rotated back and forth. And I know that this is playoffs and it's different, but Robin Lehner is still a pretty good goalie. So I kind of was surprised at the people thinking like, oh, this is a terrible move and it was going to backfire.
Well, I can understand why the reaction was that way for a number of reasons. One, Robin Lehner has played one game in 3 weeks. The last time out, he was shelled. And then you look at how well Marc-Andre Fleury had played, not just this season, but also in these playoffs. He was the leading, go to Vegas. He's the guy at the top of the sports book in terms of Conn Smythe favorites. So he's been fantastic. And then he has this ugly error in game 3, hands the game to the Montreal Canadiens, and to then have the leash yanked that quickly, like that to me is what's shocking, because now at a certain point, and we talked, we'll go in depth, as you mentioned, with Kevin Woodley about it. But to me, the tough part now is going back to Marc-Andre Fleury. You've now said publicly to everyone, at least this is how I view it, that you don't trust Marc-Andre Fleury to rebound. I would have thrown him right back out there right away. Get it out of your system, get back to playing, stop thinking about it. And now instead, to everyone who has seen your gaffe, it's become a focal point and a talking point more than it should have been.
Yeah. I think it's actually easy because because Lehner hasn't started multiple games in a row in a long time. So it's really easy to just go back to Fleury. You're in Vegas. I actually, what's funny, Frank? And I watched that play again, and I give Fleury credit. He's got a really good sense of humor. I love the fact that in practice he was reliving it, but then doing it successfully and cheering himself. But I actually felt his decision making on the poke check in the earlier game was worse. Like the mishandling of the puck was just, it's unfortunate. Like it's really, I don't think it was anything more like you couldn't have come at a worse time, obviously. But I didn't think it was that like when he handles the
But
puck.
hasn't he earned you the runway then for that exact reason to then go back into the net for game 4?
Yeah, but is that any different than what they did in game 1 against Colorado? Like he's an older goalie, and I think fatigue can play a factor. So they look and say, hey, we'll go back.
I think that's total BS. Marc-Andre Fleury statistically has proven the more games he plays, the better he is. That's just fact.
Yeah, but if you look at the Minnesota series, like late in that Minnesota series, he wasn't nearly as good as he was early. And I think they read that well. And I'll say this, game 1 against Colorado, you could have played Fleury and Lehner and they would have got shelled. Like,
and that's fair. But I think
right?
part of what in addition to the headspace that he's in about the gaff, which was, ugly and made for a really tough night, and I'm sure a tough morning that followed. The tough part is he's got this other history of looking over his shoulder where another guy comes in and Matt Murray in Pittsburgh and carries your team to 2 Stanley Cups. He sort of opened the door and gave way to that. And now all of a sudden you go to that again. It's like, is this happening for a third time? A team on the precipice potentially of winning the Stanley Cup and you go to the other guy? Like, to me, there has to be some loyalty in this guy got us this far. He got us through the first round in a high event series against Minnesota. He helped us topple the top team in the league and the President's Trophy winner in the Colorado Avalanche. Why doesn't that, and not saying it's totally gone and thrown out the window, but why isn't there any loyalty to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll say this. I'll be stunned if he doesn't play game 5. I think Fleury's going to play the rest of the series. He had a one game off. They won. And I think it's as good as Robin Lehner played in that game. And by the way, he was very good. Give him a lot of credit for, what'd you say, 1 game in 3 weeks, and he was solid. But I think it's a really easy decision. I'll be stunned if Marc-Andre Fleury isn't starting game 5 at home in Vegas.
And likewise for Robin Lehner. I mean, Pete DeBoer's MO the whole time has been go run with a guy until he gives you reason otherwise. And in this case, Robin Lehner played a fantastic game 4. I think they go back to him for game 5.
Oh,
my thing is we made it 7-8 minutes in the pod without talking about officiating yet. This is amazing.
Yeah. Well, here's how it's, I guess I get a little tired of officiating talk because it doesn't change. And the NHL has shown no willingness to want to change it. So someday, and maybe that's their point. Maybe they're winning, because I'm just kind of like, you know what am I going to say? Like, hey, Lee was not good there. I don't think there's really, it's not even a hot take to say, oh, wow, the officiating was terrible last night. Like there were so many head scratching moments in the game where it's just like,
you could be the NBA too. Like, that's every single night it's a topic.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, here's the thing. I think it's time for change, though. And I've said this previously because, and I do think you're right. It's an easy critique. There's lots of whining. My thing is just the inconsistency. At least when you get to some other sports, like, you have a pretty general idea, like a foul in game 1 of the NBA regular season is still a foul in game 7 of the NBA finals. And in this case, that doesn't necessarily exist. And so I just, instead of putting your whistle away or game management or any of those things, I think especially the NHL has an opening here. After Tim Peel was caught on the hot mic, like, you have a chance to reinvent how this game is officiated. And it doesn't need to be some amazing broad stroke and rewrite the rule book or anything like that. Just call what's actually in there. That's it.
Man.
That's all you have to do, and do it consistently.
It's not hard.
The first game till the end. I know there's going to be a difference of opinion in terms of how one ref sees it versus how another is, but in terms of getting, each slash, getting each hook, getting each high stick, because it's in overtime in a playoff game doesn't make it not a hook or not the penalty still needs to be called. And I think once players get that sense through the first few months of what could be for us, people watching, a lot of fun with a ton of power plays, they're going to adjust pretty damn quick because they're going to have to, or else they're not going to be playing.
Yeah, they can't do it now. You got to do it at the start of the regular season, and then just.
But there should be a summit this summer. You should stop and take 5 former players, 5 current players, take 5 current officials, and 5 members of the league office staff, and throw them all in a room for a week and figure out how to get this done.
Yeah. Hey, buddy, I'd love to see it. The NHL has never shown a willingness. The one thing, though, that it irks me to no end is, well, the refs don't want to, they don't want to impact the game. And I'm like, that's such a moronic statement, because by not calling
they
you're
make
impacting the game.
Exactly. 100%. So perfectly said.
Yeah. So it's just, it's embarrassing that the NHL to me has shown an unwilling, but I will say this. I also blame the players a little bit because the players now have more voice and power than ever before. And while it would take courage, when you had Mario Lemieux and Brett Hall in the 90s do it, they did it kind of as individuals. I believe you should get the biggest voices. You can have McDavid's, you can have Kucherov's, you can have Hedman's, you can have Matthews, you can have Crosby, Ovechkin, go down the list and get those players to say, okay, enough's enough. We just want you to call the rule book. That's it. We don't need new rules. Just call the rule book.
And it doesn't need to be personal. I think that's the big thing. We mentioned Chris Lee by name. Like, it's not about Chris Lee. It's not about any one individual referee. It's about the entire system and ecosystem in terms of how it's officiated and the mindset around it, that when you get to the playoffs, this is a different game being called than it is in the regular season. And that can't happen. Like, look at a team. I mean, look, you've seen it up close and personal. Look at the Oilers. Like, how do you get through a number of playoff games and have one power play opportunity? You know, the best power play in the league with two superstars, maybe the best power play in the history of the league, given how the advances in defense, penalty kill, and goaltending, not get any opportunities. Like, you can't tell me that they didn't earn more opportunities with some of the abuse that McDavid alone takes. 2
years in the he hasn't had a penalty called against him. If you go back against the Chicago series or the Winnipeg Jets. So, and I went through, there was no
that's
time
8
in the
games,
regular
right?
season. Yeah. In 8 games, he never had one power play, like no penalty. Did he draw a penalty in 8 games? McDavid.
How is that possible? It's the answer is it's not.
Yeah. So it's just that to me, and I give McDavid credit. He doesn't
complain, but it's going to take someone like LeBron James. You saw his tweets last week about the NBA schedule and how it's led to all these injuries, and that he was telling them before the season started that we can't come back on this short of rest. Why aren't more star players stepping up to defend, really what is the fabric of the game?
Yeah, it's true. And it takes some courage. And you know what? If you don't want to do it publicly,
might be expensive too.
Yeah, if you don't want to do it publicly, then just have the meeting. The NHLPA carries a lot of weight. Last I checked in the NHL. So conduct a meeting and do it behind closed doors, because yelling out for everybody to see just creates, LeBron James can say what he wants about it, but it's funny. If you look at the amount of superstar players injured, it's not actually that much higher than previous years. But the point is it gets attention, but then it kind of goes away. I think what the NHL players need to do is come up with a plan, present it to the NHL. You don't need the public to see everything you're presenting if you don't want, but make it abundantly clear that change needs to happen.
I think that's the only way anything gets done, because no one thinks that the NHL is going to respond to this public barking in a positive manner. That's not how they do business. You bark and they get back up against the wall and they say, we're not changing. No. But I just think they have a wonderful opportunity here with all that's gone on with the Tim Peel stuff. Make a change. It's better for everyone.
You're not going to get an argument from me, buddy. I think it would be great. Hey, let's get to our big guest today because we are going to go into the goaltending position. We'll get a guy who, of course, understands it from In Goal Magazine and NHL.com. He's also done goaltending consulting for Hockey Canada and a few other organizations. We welcome to the pod Kevin Woodley. And Kev, always great to have you, man. The first question I have to ask you is Leonard Fleury. People were fired up about it. What were your thoughts on the decision before the game? And then, of course, after the big win for Vegas?
Well, it's real easy at the end to say good job, good effort, right decision. The reality is we went into the playoffs talking about this, Jason. I thought that Vegas might had a chance to be the team that bucked the trend and actually went back and forth between their two goaltenders and actually used a tandem in the postseason. And I mean, I can't remember the number now because it's been so long since the playoffs started, but going into it was like 25 in a row or in that neighborhood where they just alternated back and forth. And within that stretch, Marc-Andre Fleury, who's had all the success in Vegas, had his first 9-game win streak in a rotation. Robin Lehner had a lot of success in a rotation. The problem was they got out of the gate and Fleury was so good in those first 4 games against Minnesota, and he had to be. Like, they leaned on him heavily. They gave up a ton of grade A's in that first round, and he got them through. I think a lot of people, either they don't see it or don't remember it. Vegas isn't playing. if not for Marc-Andre Fleury in those first 4 games. They don't get past Minnesota. It doesn't even go to 7 games without Marc-Andre Fleury. So at the time, I understood why you abandoned the rotation. He was just bailing them out night after night. And then it becomes tougher and tougher to pick your moments when you go back to the other guy. They did in the opener in Colorado. I liked that decision because you could see Fleury's play drop off the final 3 games of the Minnesota series. As good as he was in the first 4, that level slipped. Give them a night off, they get blown out, everyone starts going, oh, like Robin Lehner looks like he's struggling. Like, no, that was just, it didn't matter who was in net. You could have had Patrick Waugh, George Vezina, all of them in there combined, standing side by side, blocking it up like a brick wall, and Colorado was going to score. They dominated that game. So I think a lot of people then coming into this decision were looking at that Robin Lehner and not the Robin Lehner who has been a Vezina finalist in the last 3 years and has had so much success. I didn't have a problem with it. Probably better to do it at 2-1 in the series rather than 3-1. And to me, the interesting question now is, what do you do? Because Fleury has been good. I mean, him and Carey Price and Vasilevsky just below it. Like, there's a reason these 3 goalies are still playing. They've been at such a level in these playoffs, so much like head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of, when we look at some of the advanced numbers from Clearsight Analytics, goals saved, but also save percentage above expected. It's Fleury and Price at the top of it. Do you go back to him now that you've given him that mental break? We saw the puck handling gaff, but to me, it was almost a poke check the game before. Like, as much as that has always been part of Marc-Andre Fleury's repertoire and something that's absolutely in the pre-scout for the Montreal Canadiens, like, it was borderline a reckless poke check. It was so premature. It was so early. And things like that, if you're the coaching staff, from the outside, we're guessing. The coaching staff, the goalie coach in particular, Mike Rosati, he'd have a feel for whether that is a sign of mental fatigue. So if they felt there was some of that setting in and it sounded like that was the reason for the decision based on Pete DeBoer's presser last night after the game, then yeah, you got to support it. It worked all year. Why would you have something work that well in the season and that completely abandoned in the playoffs? I get at the beginning because of Fleury. I'm not expecting them to go back to a pure rotation, but mixing in both guys is what got them to where they are as a team. So why not mix them both in the playoffs as much as nobody else ever has, really?
And so that leads to my question. And we kind of want to focus on the evolution of the position. And for many years, they didn't do anything on it. Now there's goalie coaches. Heck, some teams have like goalie groups of consultants. If that's what got you there, and why do you think teams are so opposed to it? Like, does a goalie have to get in a groove and suddenly play every game for 2 months when they don't do that all regular season? Like, are we still not fully embracing the position, maybe understanding how physically demanding it is? And if you have 2 good goalies, which I understand is rare, not many, like if you have Carey Price, there's a big drop off to Jake Allen. If you have Vasilevsky, there's a pretty big drop off to McElhaney. So I understand that. But in situations like this, Kevin, do you see moving forward teams or coaches that would be willing to buck the trend of going with one guy?
Probably. Well, I was going to say, like, this is a league that's a copycat league, right? So it's probably going to take somebody having success. But if you look at that, like, I know the last 2 years we got Vasilevsky, who's a workhorse, played every minute last year in the bubble, in a year where more and more teams went to, not alternating, not tandems, but they used both guys just because of the workload and the unique nature of those playoffs with more back-to-back games. But Binnington before that, but in the years leading up to that, a lot of situations where both guys played. Again, not in a rotation. Like, a rotation is extreme. We've seen it work before. It's just been a long time, right? Like, I think it was, trying to remember the year now, I think it was 96 or 98, around there. The New Jersey Devils farm team used a pure rotation, and the names will tell you how long ago it was. It was Mike Dunham and Corey Schwab. They'd done it during the season. They went into the playoffs. They alternated every game back and forth and won a Calder Cup. Now, the problem is everyone's going to say, well, look, that was so long ago. It can't work now. Like, look how, like, that was forever ago. What are you talking about? Well, nobody's tried it since. So I was kind of hoping selfishly that Vegas would give it a go. I do think we've seen the trend towards, using both guys, but quite often it's because one guy stubs his toe, right? Like, dating back to Cam Ward and Martin Gerber, right? And Ward winning in as a rookie. I think more and more you're going to see teams start to look like Vegas has at performance. And are we seeing signs of a drop-off? Are you now starting, like, even if our number one guy is this much better than our number two, if the workload has gotten to a point where we're only getting 80% of our number one guy, are we better to throw the number two in for a game so we can get our number one back to 100%? It's a brave decision. It's not like you can give away a game in a best of 7 series. It's the type of decision that leads to a lot of headlines. It could lead to a lot of second guessing if it doesn't play out. It becomes bulletin board material. Look, they're not even throwing their starter at us tonight. Like, I get all those things, and yet, especially for an older goalie like Fleury, to me, this makes sense. It's just, nobody wants to be the one to sort of be brave enough to do it, and Pete DeBoer was, and it paid off. And if it continues to pay off, I expect we'll see both goalies again the rest of the playoffs and into the Cup final. And Robin Lehner has had not his best season, but he's still, we know what he's capable of. Fleury's had the best season in the National Hockey League, and that's what makes it hard to go away from him, in addition to his popularity. Like, he should win the Vezina Trophy. And if it's Tampa in the next round, and I know that's still a big if, and if they get through, they're going to need that level of goaltending to have a chance. There's a team in Vegas that gives up a lot more grid A's than a lot of people seem to realize. They lean on their goaltending a lot more heavily, I'd argue, than a team of their quality in terms of the players in front of them maybe need to some nights. But they're going to need both of them. Like, I don't see this as Lehner back for the rest of the way. So I'm curious to see how it goes. It's an evolution that's been slow to come, and I understand why. But increasingly, as we go to 1A, 1B tandem and mixes in the National Hockey League, then increasingly it makes sense to try it in the postseason as well.
And that makes sense, Kevin. But going back to Vegas's MO under Pete DeBoer, especially in the playoffs last year, I think you hit it right on the head. They kind of seem to go with one guy until one, and you use the word perfectly, stub their toe. My question is, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Vegas go back to Robin Lehner for Game 5, but is Lehner physically capable of carrying this team the rest of the way if need be? And that, to me, is the biggest question mark out there, because, and you know way better than me, Kevin, but looking back over over goalies over the last 2-3 decades, have we ever seen a goaltender as big as Robin Lehner is? I mean, there's lots of talk in and around Vegas. Lehner is pushing 300 pounds. Like, I don't know any goaltender out there that's that big that could play for a sustained period of time with, this time of year.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I don't want to make it like a negative, because he is big, right? Like, I mean, the numbers fluctuated over the years, and 275. I mean, he's just a massive human being. He's actually, it's funny because he's a guy that in the past would lead to a lot of phone calls to Kay Whitmore about the size of goalies and equipment, and then the same people that would call would have a chance later on to see Robin in person and be like, oh yeah, okay, like, this isn't equipment, this is just Robin Lehner. He's a big dude, and he moves really well for a big dude. But so it is a fair question. And I think largely, if you look at his success in the last few years, it's been in a tandem situation. You look at with Greiss, even in Chicago, and I felt he could have played more in Chicago, but they didn't run him out there every night. Even when he was out playing Corey Crawford, like, they still balance that. And I don't think he's going to be a 65, 70 game workhorse starter. And I think the same wear and tear you're talking about has to apply to your formula in the playoffs. Now, the difference would be he's had, almost a month off, right? So he's going to be really fresh. And now we're at that stage in the playoffs where it's every second day. We're not seeing any back-to-backs at this point in the postseason, and those can really have a cumulative effect on goalies. I always laugh at this one because everyone talks about, like, goalies can't play back-to-back. Well, yeah, they can. The question is, what are you getting out of them 2 nights later, that 3 and 4? Like, have you started to see that fall off? And just the size of Robin and I mean, he plays a pretty efficient game though, Frank. Like, he's not all over the place. He's not, like, he plays a game that's pretty tidy and manageable in terms of not being overly hard on the body. Like, if Robin Lehner tried to play like Marc-Andre Fleury, yeah, you're probably not getting a lot of games out of him. I'd say at this point in the playoffs, he probably could. But I guess the bigger question is, and it comes back to the same question, and it applies to Fleury, is, yeah, he could, but should he? Right? Like, if that performance starts to drop off because fatigue starts to set in, you've got this other guy, use him. So It's a good point about Robin. I think it's been a point, Frank, that has led to hesitancy from some other teams in free agency in years past. I think it's a point that led to the New York Islanders being a little less certain about locking him up long term, despite the fact he was a Vezina finalist there. Just physically and the size of him, if you're going to make that investment in a goaltender, recognizing that he's not going to be a 60-game guy, you're going to need to invest in a 1B to go alongside of him. I don't know if it's accurate or it's fair. We haven't seen him get that opportunity, but to this point in his career, at least the track record would indicate that he's probably better off in that 50-game window. And again, if it applies in the regular season, why doesn't it apply in the playoffs?
Mm-hmm. And Kevin, the one other big question mark I have coming through all this is, what does this goaltending change, given that Marc-Andre Fleury was the leading Conn Smythe contender to this point? What does this say about the trust that Vegas has in Fleury? And I know that's a big question to throw out there given how well he's played, but look, everyone saw that gaffe. And I think, to me, when you see that and how damaging it was, you throw that guy right back on the horse next game and get his head right back in it. Now all of a sudden, is he thinking about it more? Is he thinking that the leash is short? I don't think anyone expected maybe the leash to be this short given how well he's played.
He's been through it before, right? We've seen a short leash in Pittsburgh for him a couple of times before. I remember the second of the back-to-back cups. It was a similar type situation. I think it was the conference finals where he finally had a little bit of a hiccup, and boom, Matt Murray was in there right away. And a lot of people asked the same question, wow, that was a pretty short leash. But Murray was Sullivan's guy, and it didn't. As soon as there was an opportunity, he got him back in there, and they won a cup, and everybody's happy. It's a really good point. And I thought of it myself yesterday when they made the switch. That was the one part, to have him have to sit on that mentally for an extra couple of games rather than, as you said, get right back on the horse and sort of wipe it from your memory and just go out and play. Thing is, maybe for a younger guy, but it's the National Hockey League and you make tough decisions. And I think if anyone's equipped at this point to handle the mental side of that, it should be Marc-Andre Fleury because of everything he's been through in his career to date. It's going to create a lot more questions, especially if they go back to him right away for Game 5. But that's probably why teams don't do this, right? Because of all the focus and all the narratives and all the questions. Maybe it's easier this year because you control that environment in terms of those questions and the media attention in a Zoom world a lot more than you do in the past, right? Marc-Andre Fleury doesn't have to worry about a giant scrum and having a PR guy over his shoulder to cut it off after the sixth question's been asked about his puck handling gaffe, right? Maybe in some ways this new environment that we're in right now makes it easier to move on from it in terms of the outer focus. Internally, you watch him at practice the next day, he makes the same play, takes that play behind the net and makes a quick reverse seamlessly, cheers for himself, laughs it off. I think that at this point in his career, we can safely assume he's probably able to handle it. There's so much about his game. Every time there's a blip, everyone likes to point to, it's Marc-Andre Fleury folding again. He did. There's some bad moments, 2012 to 2014, some really bad moments. He's a different goaltender there. They hadn't given him the proper coaching in Pittsburgh to that point in his career. He had no technical foundation in terms of positional staples. Mike Bales comes in, establishes that. I think Fleury's become a really good bounce back goalie. The puck handling thing is tough, but it's like a bounce. It went off the heel of his stick rather than catching it flush. And by that point, off the heel and through the skates, and I know it looks terrible, but if you watch the way he moved the puck in that game, it was assertive. It was with authority. It became a big part of them disrupting Montreal's forecheck and getting out of their own end. That would be my one fear, is that not so much that he's dwelling on, is that he becomes gun shy about going out and handling the puck when that needs to be part of how he plays, especially in a low shot game not last night for Lehner, but there's been a few 15 shot nights, and that's how goalies like Fleury who are active stay engaged mentally. So I'd be afraid of him just, feeling like he has a leash on him and he wants to stay in his crease and not to get out and play it like he normally would. And that would be the sign I'd look for, right? If this has truly bothered him, then he's going to stay in his crease on pucks he would normally play. And that's where maybe it's in his head. But other than that, I think we're at a point where we can probably, forgive him the gaffe and expect that he'll be able to forgive himself the gaffe and move on.
Yeah, I think some of us focus too much thinking the guys are just mentally incapable of letting something that bad's happened erase. Fluery probably jokes about it in practice. He doesn't focus on it. He's not going to be in the next game ready to, in his mind. He's crouching over saying, "Oh, geez, I can't play the puck." I don't think that's how it works. Now, I'm not a goalie. But the goalie position over the years, Kevin, has really emerged. For many years, there was no goalie coach who was like, hey, you go in between the nets and you do your thing. And then they had extensive goalie coaches. And I think that caught the position up because forwards never had a skills coach. They're slowly getting skills coaches. So let's move ahead to the draft. And, there's 2 goalies. Some even think maybe 3 possibly to be in the first round. Now, I know because right now there's 4 starting goalies in the playoffs who are all drafted in the first round, 2 still with their team, 2 with other teams, that, hey, if you get a good goalie, don't be scared to take him. I think the biggest part of it isn't drafting goalies, it's developing goalies, Kevin. So do you feel are more teams better prepared now to develop goalies properly? Thus, the fear of taking one higher is less because you can still miss on a forward or a defenseman, right? But goalies, it seems, are focused more. Is there a better development curve in most of the soon-to-be 32 NHL teams?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a better development curve than 20 years ago. There's more resources, right? I just had a long conversation for In Goal Radio with Jeff Glass because he was kind of a player coach this year in Anaheim. It was a unique situation, but we went back, like, you remember Jeff Glass, 3rd round pick, wins the World Junior Championships in 2005. Big things are projected for him. Goes into Ottawa's system at the time, and just because of the number of goalies they had in the pecking order and Brian Elliott sort of exceeding some expectations as a much later round pick, he ends up his first year in the East Coast Hockey League and no support whatsoever. Your first year pro, your biggest jump, you talk to goalies all over the place, like it's not the AHL to the NHL, it's always junior or college to pro. Like that's the biggest jump they have to make. Every guy will tell you that. A lot of them, like, they make that jump in Jeff's case, 20 some odd years ago, and, well, maybe not quite 20, but close to it, and nothing, like no support, like, because he got put in the coast and there was nobody there to help him. Figure it out on your own, kid. Kind of seems absurd to somebody you've invested a 3-year entry-level deal and a 3rd round draft pick on, but that's the way it was. And for the longest time, even when he started, like, forget having support in the ECHL, which is now seen as more of a development league, and more, but not all teams will make sure a goalie coach gets down to see the guy that's down there, because you can have guys come from that level and hit. But there are still some where I've talked to guys who are, the coveted NCAA free agent signings, and quite often they'll end up, in a sort of 4-5 spot to start, and they'll spend some time in the ECHL and not have a visit, not hear a word from the NHL goalie coach or the AHL goalie coach or the development goalie coach. So it still happens, but nothing like before. When Jeff came up, like, they didn't even have a goalie coach in the American League. Now every team has a development goalie coach at some level, some not full-time, some still part-time, but there's just way more support, way more infrastructure there. Still not, like I said, there are still some organizations that run part-time and their AHL development goalie coach is not there all the time. It's not perfect. Some do it better than others, but most have more support for their goalies than they've had in the past. And, as you said, like, forwards are finally catching up. They're working with skills coach in the summer. It used to be forwards and defensemen in the summer. All they did was bigger, stronger, faster, right? They didn't work on skills. Goalies for 20 odd years, they spent their whole summer working on the skill side of the game. So I think a lot of that development is sort of left to themselves, but then in the season, you need that support. It's actually a problem in Canada right now. Like, we're mostly a country of private goaltending coaches and private companies, and you go to summer camps and you have your consultant. And then when the season starts, which is when it's most important to be able to watch video and go over things and learn how to play the position while you're actually playing the position, as opposed to just running drills at a goalie camp in the summer, they don't have the same level of support. Unless they're paying for a private coach and a private consultant, they don't have that in minor hockey because we're a private industry, whereas in Sweden and Finland, they develop all their goalie coaches and they put them into their minor hockey systems. Russia now too. So, kind of similar thing, right? You need that support once the season is on, and more goalies once they're drafted in the NHL have it than, I say 20 years ago or when Jeff Glass started. The reality is even 5-10 years ago, there were a lot of NHL organizations that did not have an American Hockey League goalie coach, and that's rare now.
So if you look at the, teams are going to, Spencer Knight's drafted first round. There's probably going to be a few this year. Goalie age has been a big thing. Like you've got the outliers like Fleury and Price who play right away. But like you look at Binnington finally came to the NHL at 26 years of age and, backstopped the Blues to a Stanley Cup. And people are like, oh, it kind of comes out of nowhere. But historically, it's been a position that unless you were truly elite, you didn't get a chance really until you're 25. Do you see that changing? Do you think the goalie position just on ageism alone is going to change in the coming years?
Yeah, I think that shift's already started, right? Like you point to Spencer Knight and getting a playoff start. Look at Vasilevsky. Like as much as we look at him now in the finished product, like he got opportunities at a pretty young age. Carter Hart will become the cautionary tale if he doesn't recover from this year's skid, right? But he was a guy I would have pointed to last year as sort of leading that charge just 1 year in the AHL, not even a full year and ready to go. Mackenzie Blackwood's another one, right? Like he was not, he was pretty young into the NHL and at times a pretty tough environment in New Jersey, and he's done really well there. So I think increasingly you're seeing teams, much like skaters, willing to take that chance. Jeremy Swayman, first year, I know college, so he's a little older, but like first year pro this year, and he gets starts for the Boston Bruins. They're willing to give that opportunity to young goaltenders. I mean, Swayman's an NCAA Mike Richter winner as a goalie of the year in college, but not necessarily just the high-end first-round draft picks that are getting the opportunity. It seems like more coaches and more organizations are at least willing to grant that opportunity, give them that shot earlier than before. And listen, not everybody's ready for it too. Like that's the other thing, right? Like Jordan Binnington becomes the prime example, but sometimes you go to an organization, like it can be a change in coaches. It can be a change in coaches privately. You can find something along that path. This is one of the things for goalies that bounce around. And even though he was in the same organization, goalies that bounce around, they get a bunch of different voices. And it can actually become problematic because every time you go to a new team, the goalie coach thinks he can fix something and he wants you to do it. Not every time does it fit your game. But you better look like you're trying to do it, or that guy's probably not going to tell the head coach to tap you to play the game. So it becomes this sort of, what's my game? What can help me get better puzzle? And what pieces do I use? Tools in the toolbox is what goalies say. And sometimes it's not that it took them 6 years to get to being ready to the NHL. Sometimes it's a spot along that path where they discover that voice, that sort of foundation, that staple. Someone triggers something in their game that brings all the pieces together in a way that it wasn't brought in before. I would argue for Jordan Binnington, both in the AHL with Dave Rogalski, St. Louis hired him as a goaltending coach, and then knowing the changes he made in the summer months with Andy Chiodo, who's now the development goalie coach in Pittsburgh, and actually sort of through in goal, getting an eye on some of the significant changes he made into the mechanics of how he played the position. That was probably bigger than just it's going to take 5 or 6 years. So, and increasingly as we have bigger staffs and more people involved in goaltending departments in NHL teams, they'll be able to sort of recognize what works for one and sort of find more, I guess, give goalies more tools, access to more tools that might finally unlock their potential sooner than just bouncing around till they find something that works.
All right, Kevin, I want you to put on your fantasy GM hat for a second. Seattle Kraken expansion draft right around the corner. Which goalie should the Kraken be looking at, talking about as they go through their expansion process?
Oh, that's a tough one. See, because the caveat here has to be, and I've used this one with Jason before, my nickname in all my long-standing hockey pools is the Donator. So any advice that I give on any type of draft needs to be weighted heavily. It's interesting because some of the names that make a lot of sense to me are UFAs this summer. And that's what makes this so unique. And I think if you look at Ron Francis's history with the Carolina Hurricanes, like, I don't know that. I think we in Vegas, remember there was all this, like, they're going to load up on goalies. They're going to load up on goalies. Like, when I look at Ron Francis and his MO in Carolina, I would expect them to go heavy on defensemen. There are so many goaltenders that are going to be available to UFA this summer. But in terms of what names might make the most sense, like, you know, you look at the success that Price is having in the playoffs right now. It's funny. I actually thought there was a point there where I thought he might actually end up in Seattle for a lot of different reasons, but clearly that's not happening now. But a lot of it is because he was able to back off on his workload in the season. And they're in the playoffs because Jake Allen was so good. And he signed to such a reasonable ticket that I can't help but wonder if Jake Allen becomes a target there. So that's one. The one that makes a lot of sense to me for different reasons is, again, I don't know if this counts because he's a pending UFA, but Linus Ullmark. He's outperformed a bad Buffalo team statistically for several years now. The only question mark around him right now seems to be an ability, you know, can he stay healthy? Because he's had some challenges with injuries in recent years. But what a lot of people forget is there's a natural tie in there. Andrew Allen, who's been doing the goalie scouting for the Seattle Kraken for the last, I think officially for a year, but also was doing some consulting even before that, was a goaltending coach in the Buffalo Sabres when Linus came up. So there's some ties there. He was a guy, Jason knows, who I was banging the drum as teams were looking for sort of, you know, UFA rentals in the trade market up to the deadline. Like, he was a guy that I thought got overlooked. Ultimately, Buffalo decided to keep him because they wanted to sign him long-term because they saw what a lot of us saw in the goaltending world, a really good goaltender. Like, they're a different team when he was in the net. So I could see them looking at a guy like him, whether it's in UFA or whether they work something out beforehand. Other names, I'm just trying to think. If Minnesota protects Kakkonen, and I'd be surprised if they did, but if they do, Cam Talbot is on a reasonable price ticket and has been is he going to be a world beater? I'm not so sure, but he's a really steady, above expected goalie. Like, he's just getting, like, the kind of guy that would be perfect behind what Ron Francis built in Carolina if the focus is on building a great defense. And this is the one thing, right? Like, as the goalie guy, I always worry they're going to take away my goalie union card for saying this, but I've had this conversation with a lot of goalie coaches, and if you were to ask them, what do you want on a team? You're the goalie coach. What do you want on a team? Will you take like 3 elite centers, a great top 4 in defense, or a superstar goalie? Most of them will tell you, give me the elite top 4 on defense, and I'll build you a goalie that can win behind it. And so if that's the model that, you know, we see that a little bit in Carolina, and if that's the model that we have in Seattle, a guy like Cam Talbot fits that type of team really well. So that would be another name. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of scraping for a third one here. So I didn't do my homework on this.
There's one in your backyard. What do you think of a guy like Braden Holtby? I was going to ask you next about Freddie Anderson and his season and how the wheels kind of fell off. What happens with Freddie Anderson this summer?
Well, so Braden Holtby, I think, would be a fit, except like they structured that contract almost to make it sort of Seattle proof, right? Like are you going to invest a pick in one guy and have him go straight down to restricted free agency in 1 year? And the $4.3 million cap hit is one thing, but it's 5.7 on real money. So you're spending above what the cap hit is. They backloaded that deal. I'm not sure that would, like, if I'm Seattle and I guess the one thing is you could get a goaltender that if you turn him around and turn him into an asset, you could use him as someone at the trade deadline, or if he comes in and has a Marc-Andre Fleury type resurrection. And I mean, from a personality standpoint, like Braden Holtby screams Seattle, right? Like, takes the guitar on the road, plays that, like, right down to the he is a perfect West Coast guy. So
but you could go Holtby and Allen and make the cap hits work together, and then you have a pretty solid tandem. The only thing is it's probably kind of temporary because, I mean, maybe Allen could stay longer, but Holtby's not going to stay forever. Yeah,
exactly. He's got 1 year left on his contract. I don't know that Braden's viewed because of the way things have had, like, statistically, the last couple of years have not been great. And if you look at the numbers, the fall off before that, I would argue a lot of that was Washington didn't defend really well for the longest time in front of him. And you saw how good he was when the last time they did, they raised the cup. So, But I don't know that other people view him in that same light, or as many other people view him in that same light as they used to. And he's making kind of number one goaltender money, and it's only for 1 year. Like, I just see between unrestricted free agency and some of the other names we mentioned, I see options that I think would be more attractive to them. Like, Braden doesn't look better when you start to look at some of the advanced numbers either. Like the raw save percentage, he's better than that, especially this season in Vancouver, because they were a tire fire defensively, but not to the point where you're like, this is our future number one. And just because of the age, and even though it's only like 31 or going on 32, like he's not at the end of the line, but I'm just not sure the perception is that this is a number one goaltender we build around anymore. Don't know if that's fair. I've seen signs of in his game as he added some technical elements under Ian Clark this season. You saw him in the 2 Toronto games after they came off the COVID break. Like, he's got that in him, but he basically rebuilt his game on the fly this year technically. And maybe they saw enough coming out at the end of that hey, this could be our number one, but I'm not sure a lot of other teams view him the same way right now.
And last one from me, this won't shock you. There's been some increased conversation in the last couple of weeks, I'm told, around the 2 guys in Columbus. Obviously, Elvis Merzlikins, he's expansion exempt, and everyone wants an expansion exempt goalie to add to their roster. Does it make sense to you that one of those 2 guys, either Korpisalo or Merzlikins, could be on the move? And if you could pick one, which would it be?
The funny thing is they could have both been on the move last summer. I'm sure you heard the same things, Frank. Like, my understanding is it was either or were available. It's just that the price was so high, especially on Korpisalo coming off that $972 against Toronto in the play-in round in the bubble, that teams weren't willing to move on them. But I'm pretty confident in saying that both were available last year. And to go back to the whole idea of development staffs, Jason, like, they are the example of what doing scouting right in the goaltending department can do for you. One of the big reasons that the Vancouver Canucks just signed their goaltending coach, Ian Clark, to 5-year contract 2 weeks after only signing their head coach to a 2-year contract. Because
that's where Ian Clark was, by the way, previously, as you know.
He was the architect of that Columbus pipeline of goaltenders, and they can afford to give, just as they could afford to let Bob walk because they had Merzlikins and Korpisalo coming, they were able to entertain offers on those 2 last year, and they can move one of them this year because they've got Daniel Tarasov coming, who is, I've had accounts, the best description I've had of him was at a young age, he's like 6'6", 6'7". He's like Pekka Rinne, but his game's more evolved at this age than Pekka's was. So there's the benefit. You can turn them into assets and move them. Goalies are always depreciated assets. I think if I'm Columbus and I'm looking at, like, the guy who's going to have more value is probably Merzlikins. But from the outside, he's probably also the guy I want to keep the most. Like, that's the guy I would target. So if you're Columbus, it's, if you think he's your number one, it's tougher to move him than it is Korpisalo. Like, to me, they kind of missed the boat by keeping the asking price so high on Korpisalo. Last year was the summer to move Korpisalo, even if Tarasov wasn't coming over, and you could have found somebody cheap in UFA to sort of tie you over for a year. That was the time to sell high. I don't know that the value on him is where it used to be, and so that becomes a tougher trade. It's kind of, again, do we give away the guy that everyone thinks is better because we've got something else coming and just take a higher pick and we're in rebuild mode, or do we keep the guy that we also agree gives us the best chance to win in the long term? Korpisalo has some elements in his game that should be, like, he should be a top-tier goaltender in this league, and there are some elements in his game that really suit the way the game is playing. His patience on his edges at a time when East-West play has never been higher in terms of the type of attacks. Like, I know a lot of goalie coaches that look at him and are like, man, like, this guy should be it, and yet he's never been able to sort of maintain it consistently to the point now where some of those same guys that would have gone to bat for acquiring him, they're probably a little less certain than they were, a year or 2 years ago about his upside.
Kev, before we get to rapid fire, one last one from me. Nedeljkovic, a guy who's on waivers, that story's happened many times. Goalie goes on waivers, heck, defenseman, forwards go on waivers, and then they come out of nowhere. He's got 29 NHL games. He's still on the shorter side. Do you think you can be a long-term successful goalie in today's NHL when, as you mentioned, there's so much East-West now? at 6 feet? Can you do it? Or is it a detriment, which sucks if you're just not gifted with height?
Yeah, hey, like, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt at 6'6" more than you are at 6 foot. But I look at Saros, I look at the career that Yaroslav Halak has had. I know this year didn't end the way he wanted it to in terms of, being Tuukka and Swayman in the playoffs. I look at Saros, Nedeljkovic. Listen, I look at it this way, and this is going to be a really interesting debate in this draft because Sebastian Cossa is getting a lot of attention at 6'6", and the way he moves for a 6'6" goaltender, I understand why. Like, it's exceptional. Does not open a lot of holes, tracks into pucks, doesn't open up on saves. Like, there's a lot there. But someone put it best to me. There is an ideal height for goaltenders, and it's probably around 6'3", 6'4". And that at either extreme, you are now having to overcome your size, whether it's 2 inches shorter or 2 inches taller, or 3 inches shorter or 3 inches taller. The difference is the guys that are 3 inches taller are going to get every opportunity to do so, and the guys who are 3 inches shorter typically don't. There are teams that won't even allow their scouts to submit reports on goaltenders who are 6'1", in some cases anything under 6'2". And I know other teams that are actually looking at the curve between drafted goaltenders, the size continues to rise, and goaltenders having success in the NHL, the size chart continues to go smaller. And they intersected a long time ago. And yet at the draft, everyone's chasing size. And for some teams, that's an advantage. It's like, man, we don't even have to worry about half the league drafting the guy we got targeted because he's not big enough. Mikey DiPietro is going to play in the National Hockey League at 6 foot. Like, so guys can overcome it, especially in an East-West game, because they're typically quicker, they're typically faster, and when they move East-West, they open up far fewer holes than those big guys, and that's what the big guys have to overcome. They're not as mobile typically. They open big holes. Like, the bigger they are, the longer those limbs, the bigger the holes that have to open as they move laterally and then close once they arrive to their new save position. So this is a fascinating debate. I do think those guys can play. Nedeljkovic is the latest example at 6 foot or under, but they're not always going to get the opportunity. Look at the last 3 years that Jonathan Bernier's had with it. We overlook him, but look how good he's been behind a bad Detroit team. There's a guy who was picked 11th overall at, I think he's listed at 6, but there's no way, 5'11". He wouldn't even get picked, right? Like, he wouldn't even get picked in the draft right now. And look at the career he's had and is still having. So I do think there are some teams, even the ones that buy into, some goalie coaches where they'll be like, yeah, you can succeed smaller. Even at that, they'll still be like, but can you be an elite number one smaller? And so it's going to be up to guys like Saros, guys like Nedeljkovic to kind of prove that next step. Guys have bought in that you can play smaller, or more guys have, but they have questions about, like, the upside versus a 6'4", 6'6" guy. But again, 6'3", 6'4" is probably your perfect window. And I don't think a lot of NHL teams have actually recognized that. Like, if we had a 6'8" goaltender on the market right now, they'd be looking at that ahead of the 6-footer. And I'm not sure that's correct. But most teams are just going to give that big guy the benefit of the doubt. It's like the high draft pick, right? You get more chances than you do if you're a 4th or 5th rounder.
All right, Kev, we finish up with rapid fire. Quick succession questions. You have to answer them. No sitting on the fence garbage. All right. So we'll start with an easy one for you. What is Kevin Woodley's cocktail of choice?
Oh, I don't drink much anymore. I'm just a beer guy, and I prefer an amber ale.
An amber ale. Okay. So you get one goalie, and he's going to start 60 games for the next 3 seasons. Who is he?
We talking all time?
No, right now, active goal.
Oh, I'm totally biased from it's got to be Vasilevsky, but I almost said Demko because I'm telling you, this kid's special, and what he did this year is not an anomaly. So, but I got to go Vasilevsky, best in the world right now.
What new, like a reverse VH or something? What is the most overhyped public conversation about goalies?
Overhyped public conversation about goalies is probably tracking. And I say that as a guy who was at the forefront of what modern tracking is But when I listen to broadcasts and hear them talk about tracking, they just think it's sort of getting eyes on the puck. There's actually a biomechanics to proper tracking. And so the way they describe it versus what it actually is are two different worlds. And so it gets overhyped on like, oh, he's tracking the puck really well. Even though the way he's tracking the puck might be actually moving him out of the way at times. So I think that's one that I hear a lot on broadcast that I don't think means the same thing to us in the goalie world that it does to the people making those statements.
Mike Smith had one of the best, most unexpected seasons. Which goalie could have the most unexpected rebound or great season next year?
Oh, I need some Jeopardy music while I think. Let's go with the one I like, Linus Ullmark. Linus Ullmark, healthy in a new environment. If that's what happens, I think he's a guy that gets overlooked, and so because he flies under the radar, it would be a surprise to people. And I think he's absolutely capable of being, a top 5, top 10 guy of the league. And the second one, I picked him at the beginning of the year, is Cal Peterson. Even with Jonathan Quick serving as a ceiling for him in LA, especially the first half, like he was a top 3-4 statistical goaltender the first half of the season. He's really good.
In their prime, if you only have one, Price, Lundqvist, who are you taking and why?
Oh, you're killing me. Can we
sitting on the
over
fence.
my shoulder. I got Price on my left shoulder and Lundqvist over my right with the jerseys in their prime. I'm still going Carey Price. I love Henrik's battle and all the different things, but the two things that would separate, like Carey's efficiency and that calm demeanor, whereas Henrik at times could run a little hot and stare down at a defenseman. And the other thing, there are not many things that Henrik didn't do exceptionally, but puck handling was one of them. And you've seen how important Carey's handles, as much as he's not a home run guy, subtle little chips and off the wall and into the right spot. Like Carey's puck handling makes a massive difference for the Canadians. It was the only thing in Lundqvist's game that never really evolved to an elite level.
If Kevin Woodley could get one skill set added to his rec league game in goal, what would it be?
Stopping the puck, because every time my beer league teammates hear me on these types of broadcasts or on local radio introduced as a goaltending expert, I think they all spit out their coffee or beer or whatever they happen to be swigging, because when it comes to actually playing the game, not so good.
Well, what's your weakness?
There's so many. There's not a rapid fire answer to my weakness. It's probably actually skating. In terms of, I learned late, and so I'm very efficient goalie mover, but I'm not a very fluid skater. I'm very technical because I came to the game in my 30s through Ian Clark and editing his magazine, and learned so much that I just had to try it. And then my Monday night skate is full of guys who played minor pro, and it's a good skate and I keep up, but by being in position and being square, the guy at the other end played pro, and he's got an artistry and an ability to read plays and anticipate and bait shooters. He's a little bit older that I just don't have in my repertoire. I don't have that instinctual goalie ability. I'm very much A to B, get in the way. And I watch the other guys and I marvel at that next level of skill. There are 7 elements of elite goaltending, if you ask Ian Clark. And I don't have any at the elite level, but I would have the technical. But it's all the other things you have to add on top of those layers that separate the greats. I don't have any of those, and that's why I love watching the guys in the NHL that do and seeing what elements truly separate them.
Okay, quickly, I was out of questions, but now I'm curious. What are the other 6? If technical is 1, what are the other 6?
I don't have them in front of me. He did a whole list for us, and this is embarrassing because I don't have it sort of formally in my brain at the tip of my tongue, but technical is only one of them. The ability to be creative and make instinctive saves, compete and battle is something that you can quantify. Some goalies just shut it off when they can't get there with a perfect technical save. Do you go outside of that butterfly box and find ways to make saves? I don't know if technical is divided into skating, but I'm going to have to leave it at this because I don't have a list in front of me and I'm having trouble. The In Goal Radio podcast has a 2-part series with Ian Clark, and it's all listed there. So shameless plug. Shameless
hey,
plug.
buddy, that's a veteran move.
That's how it's
savvy.
done.
I like it.
And I got one last rapid fire for you for Leaf fan listeners. Jack Campbell, is he a number one in this league? Yes or no?
Yeah, he was this year. If he can stay healthy, yeah, like he was really good this year, right? They were really good defensively. But like not every guy can play behind that team. And I know I kind of ducked your Freddie Anderson question earlier. I didn't mean to, Frank. I think he probably plays somewhere else next season, and I could see him having a bounce back as well, because I've always been a big Freddie guy. But Cujo's sort of the great example of this, right? Like the guy who you put him behind a team that was getting shelled, and he was unreal. You put him to the Detroit Red Wings where they were expected to win and they didn't have a lot of shots, and he struggled. And he'll admit to it. Like, not every goalie can play behind a solid defensive team. And Jack Campbell's game is really tightened. That's the other part of this. Like, there's a lot about Jack Campbell's development. Dusty Emu gets a lot of credit, and deservedly so, for sort of helping Jack Campbell, the person, get back on track as Jack Campbell, the goaltender. But I got to say this because I don't say it often enough. If you really look at Jack's game from when he arrived to now, there is so much that has changed technically. And I think because he's not allowed to talk to the media in part, like Steve Briere, the goaltending coach in Toronto, does not get nearly enough credit for that side of the evolution of Jack's game. And so he is steady. So the one that goes in between his legs in Game 7, which absolutely sucks. It's a backbreaker. But there weren't a lot of those this season. He didn't give up a lot of bad goals. Behind a team that spends so much time in the other end, ask all the Carolina goalies when they used to do this, so much time in the other end, and then boom, it's an odd man rush the other way, but you don't see a lot of rubber. A lot of goalies really struggle with that, and Jack has a mindset for that, and his technical game has come a long way. I think the one question this year was health, because he didn't stay healthy. Neither one of them did. But if he answers that, maybe not 60, 70 game. We're not talking Andre Vasilevsky here, and nobody's pretending we are. But 1A with a good 1B mix, absolutely Jack Campbell's capable of that, especially behind a good defensive team. Like, relative to environment, was he a top 5, top 10 goalie in the league? No. But was he better than expected in an environment that mentally can be more difficult than a lot of people credit because the D's so good? Yes, he was. And he deserves credit for that. And I think especially on that team, he can absolutely be a 1A.
Kev, great stuff as always, man. We appreciate it. We'll let you go because I know you got to get on the ferry. So we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Kev.
Kevin Woodley, it's always good to have him on. And he's not as bad as he says as a goaltender, but for a guy who picked it up in his 30s, man, like when you like picking up
any
hockey,
sport, yeah,
dude. Yeah, but picking up skating's hard enough. Never mind goaltending. Like most guys who played goalie quit playing goal in men's league because it's way harder to play because you got to move crazily. There's no defense. So I give him a lot of credit. Frank, coming up on the pod on Friday, we'll have Jacob Slavin, who ended the drought. Finally, a defenseman, deservingly so, wins the Lady Byng. We'll talk to him about Carolina, but also this guy's a very interesting human being off of the ice. So I look forward to that conversation. And a big week by Friday, we might know who is in the Stanley Cup Finals as we're down to best of threes. Who are you taking, Frank, this week?
I'm going to still, I think we've sort of been behind the scenes rooting for it the whole time. I think it would be a clash of titans. I think Vegas will figure it out, and same thing with Tampa. But it might take a Game 7 or 2.
Yeah, it's the boring picks, but it's probably the right picks. Although my wallet is rooting for Montreal. As I said, when the odds were 4.5, I had to take them. So I would love the upsets strictly from a financial standpoint, but we'll see how it plays out this week. We'll talk to you Friday.
Yeah. And hey, before we go, just wanted to end actually on a little bit of a solemn note. Wanted to send our best wishes to the Curvers family. Tom Curvers, the assistant GM of the Minnesota Wild, passed away this morning after a long battle with cancer, just 58, played more than 600 NHL games, and just an absolute prince of a human being. Spent his entire life working in hockey, gone way too soon at 58. So sending our best wishes along to the Curvers family and everyone around the hockey world that was close with Tom.
Well said.